So you have an NR200 or a similar case and you want to run the 5800X. Previously I reviewed a few dual tower coolers for the Ryzen 7 5800X, but not all those coolers will fit in an SFF case like this. So today let's take a quick look at a few options and see what works well in a tighter layout. Welcome to Machines and More. The 5800X is a pretty hot bugger, and there's a lot of power involved in this one in a dense chiplet. Most of the dual towers worked well with the CPU, and even though a few of those coolers will fit in the NR200, those are pretty big and it's not as elegant. I've got a couple of new asymmetrical single tower coolers here for us to take a look at today, and a reference grade one right here. This one, we'll start with this one. It's a new Scythe Mugen 5 Black Edition. Okay, yeah, I know, this looks just like the original Mugen 5, but wow, with a new black finish. The hardware is coated black, and the fan is an all black one. And one thing that's a bit different about this fan is, well, it's the new Kaze Flex Black with the higher RPM limit for the fan at 1500 RPM. You do get an extra set of fan clips for a potential push-pull setup, but this is one wide cooler, and the width does pose a bit of a problem for the push-pull compatibility in cases where the cooler height has a limitation. Now in the orientation where it's shifted so that the fan doesn't cover the RAM, there's enough width for a fan, but you're at the mercy of the I/O end of your motherboard and how tall it is, and I couldn't get a fan to fit over the I/O shroud of the Asus B550i-TX and still clear this case panel. And in the other direction, you're right up against the cabling for the NR200, so short of completely redoing the cabling, the second fan wouldn't sit nicely still. Now, if you have enough clearance and you have a case layout that works with it, I'd definitely put another fan on it. So push-pull with this super wide heatsink is definitely not a guarantee. Now, other than that, it's a nicely finished heatsink with a nickel-plated base plate, 6 heat pipes, 154.5 millimeters tall. The other new single tower cooler is Cooler Master's MA612 Stealth ARGB, is this particular one from their new Master Stealth lineup. Now, I reviewed the MA624 dual tower in the last 5800X cooler video, and it performed very well. This is a bit of an interesting one. This heatsink is nicely capped off with the logo, just like the 624, and unlike the dual tower, where it was a bit clunky in terms of being able to reverse the fan's orientation, this one, you can just mount this one so the logo is upright and then flip the fans however you want. The one I have here is the ARGB version, and it does come with two of these SickleFlow 120s, but these aren't the usual ARGB SickleFlows. This one requires an adapter cable that allows connection to different motherboard ARGB connectors. It does also feature a proprietary backplate and a slew of hardware that has to go together to mount up the bars onto the motherboard. Now, the heatsink is svelte, narrow, and compatibility is good, and you shouldn't have much of a problem getting the fans to mount to your case, provided you have enough clearance for that. 158 millimeters is the spec number, and it does feature 6 heat pipes, and it's kind of like a very nicely finished Hyper 212 on steroids with the extra 2 heat pipes. And there is a fun detail with these fans. They're not both the same. One of them has the frame reversed, so the exhaust end of the fan is not covered by the frame. And the reason for this is obviously for aesthetics, so that the RGB lighting doesn't get obscured. I like that attention to detail here. And last in this quick comparison is the reference grade Noctua NH-U12A. Certainly not a stranger to the channel, but price aside, this is the best performing single tower cooler out there. 158 millimeters tall, 7 heat pipes, and 2 best-in-class NFA 12x25s grace this cooler. This is a cooler that will cost as much as many 240 AIOs, but it's always been a great performer. The black version of this cooler has been pushed back yet again by Noctua, so I know everyone is still waiting for the black NFA 12s and the Chromax black heatsink, so we'll still be waiting a little longer still. As far as the heatsink mass goes, the Mugen 5 is the biggest and chunkiest one at 772 grams. The U12A is 740, and the MA612 is the lightest one at 690. And all of these coolers will fit the NR200 with a vented panel. The MA612 is a bit marginal, but a little bit of interference at this far end at the panel, but I would call it good enough. Certainly with a small screw, if you really wanted to, you can hold it down tight. However, from my experience, only the Mugen 5 fits reliably with the glass panel, and for sure the MA612 won't work with the tempered glass. It's just too tall. The U12A works with most motherboards if you use a small panel screw to hold the glass panel in place. So a few quick notes before diving into the thermal results with the 5800X. Because this round is more of a real-world test with CPU thermals for gaming, I did mount these in the most sensible way in conjunction with the flow-through design of the RTX 3070 Founders Edition card here, which is a rear intake for the CPU fans. Since the case layout and the position within the case is different, the results aren't directly comparable to the results from the dual tower lineup, and these were tested at a lower voltage level of 1.25 volts in a closed case. The noise normalization point across all three coolers is at 4 decibels above the noise floor, and interestingly, this represented a point very close to 80% for all cooler fans involved, including the single fan Mugen 5, and this fan did test out quite loud versus the others, despite being at a lower RPM, and what I noticed was a good bit of extra noise from turbulence when mounted against the Mugen 5's heatsink, and that was indeed picked up by the decibel meter. So for the MA612, 1600 RPM, for the U12A, 1650 RPM, and for the Mugen 5, 1350 RPM. For the first test, I locked voltage to 1.25 volts, and we are locking clock speeds at 4.6 gigahertz. Still a respectable all-core clock, but pretty much as high as these single towers will allow. For a Blender's Pavilion scene benchmark, unlike with the dual towers, there's a very meaningful gap right away between these three coolers, and the Mugen 5 is definitely falling behind. The MA612 puts in a very good performance here, really close to the U12A. And for my tests with the older Mugen 5, this has always been a bit of an odd one. It's a huge heatsink, heavier than the U12A, but it fails to effectively use that mass, and it always seems like it's playing catch-up and not able to draw the heat away from the CPU well enough. Now, I know it might not seem surprising that the Mugen 5 falls behind given that it's using one fan, and that fan's at a lower RPM, but the fan isn't the issue here. And I put the same fan on the MA612's heatsink at the exact same RPM, and well, look at the result. It's really interesting, right? For the same scene, I also ran the chip on PBO2 with a curve optimizer setting at -15 for all cores, and here are the clock speeds for the final minute of each render. Now, a few degrees typically doesn't significantly alter the clocks that the CPU boosts to, so the MA612 can yield similar boost clocks to the U12A. Certainly, it is running a little bit hotter, though. As you might expect with the Mugen 5's performance when the clocks were locked, the clocks here are noticeably lower. How about for gaming in moderate utilization situations such as with Red Dead 2 in 1440p? Well, no difference in hierarchy here, and the U12A is even better, but I surmise this is due to the closed-off nature of the heat fin design, which means that very little GPU exhaust gets taken in from below, but this also affects the GPU temps, right? And with the other two, the GPU temps are a bit better because it would appear that the CPU tower is helping out the GPU by taking in some exhaust through it. So there is a little bit of interdependence here with the closed case. The MA612 kind of gives the best middle ground, in fact. Now, if you're curious, I recorded a quick soundbite at the noise normalized level. The mic is positioned in the same spot at the same distance away, even though I had to reframe the shot since I had to remount each cooler in the case each time. Okay, so here's the breakdown. $60 for this one single fan. You can add another one for 17 bucks or so, but it may not fit your build. So that's that. $80 for the non-ARGB version of the MA612, and this version is ARGB, so it is $90. Not bad. $110 though for the top of the line in tan and brown. And with that in mind, I think the Mugen 5 is less handily recommended for the 5800X. Certainly there's some opportunity for improvement here with this heatsink, as you saw in the comparison, right? The much smaller MA612 heatsink works way better with the same fan, and we kind of saw the same phenomenon with the 5600X test and the Mugen 5. There's just so much potential here with this huge heatsink, but it just falls short. Of course, the cooler isn't priced badly, but I do think the 5800X might be above its pay grade. The one thing to note is that this is the one that reliably fits with the tempered glass panel for the NR200P. The U12A typically trails the bigger D15, but it is very competitive, and I think you expect it to be that good. But dude, that price hike makes this a tough sell. It is absolutely the best for CPU thermals, but it has to be, right? I mean, it's $30 more than the non-RGB version of the MA612. And speaking of which, with a name like Cooler Master, you expect them to be the master of coolers. And prior to the new Master Stealth generation, that would have been a bit of a bold claim, but I am super impressed with this cooler, and this one excites me more than the dual tower MA624. These sickle flow fans aren't too bad at all. They can get to a high RPM without too much noise. They've got ARGB if you want it. Thoughtful aesthetic consideration here with the frame of this fan. This heatsink design is very effective. So yeah, if I were picking up a single tower right now for a CPU, I'm going straight for this one. Why? Because it's within a degree or two of the class-leading U12A, yet it's significantly better priced. I think the heatsink is better finished, it's black, and for gaming performance, it's a little bit more balanced because it can help the GPU out a little bit too. For a typical PBO2 usage with the 5800X, the clocks are all but identical as you saw. The non-standard base plate does bother me a little bit, and it's going to be a little bit problem with some motherboards, and I don't like that there are a lot of parts to assemble with this one, but this elegant fan clip design kind of makes up for that, right? So props to the thermal guys at Cooler Master. They really hit a home run with this one. If I could ask to change one thing, just shave a few millimeters off the height of this thing, make it completely compatible with the glass panel of the NR200, and you've made a go-to cooler for your fan favorite NR200, irrespective of which side panel users choose. So alright, I hope you enjoyed this round. Full review for the 5800X coming soon. Go ahead and subscribe, like, links down below, all that good stuff. Thanks for watching today.